The heart of our missions is that God will be glorified and the others will know the grace of God who has called us. Learn how God is using the lives of people like you and like me to expand His kingdom. This is Between Brothers.
It's Juanita, really. I mean,
Juanita and Jaime.
we were born.
Jim and
Jeannie.
Jeannie and Jaime
And Juanita.
and Juanita. And I think it's going to take the students a little bit to get it, because the staff all, a lot of them talk about you with your English names, and the students are like, "Who's this Jim? We know of no Jim. There's no Jim here." So.
Well, we were one in Venezuela. They called me Juanita Jeannie. Because
Jeannie, huh?
he would call me Jeannie and everybody else would call me Juanita. And so the little kids just grabbed both of
first
them.
and second name. Juanita Jeannie. Okay, well, let's pray and get started.
Sure.
Lord, thank you for this time here with Jim and Jeannie, Jaime and Juanita. A second opportunity to sit down and hear more of the story of what you've done in their lives and through their lives to touch other lives, Lord. Bring them into your kingdom and grow your kingdom, Lord. And we pray that you would guide the conversation, that it would be a blessing to us, be a blessing to others, and that your name would be glorified. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so before we dive back into the stories, you guys are entering the role of spiritual advisor for the students. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that okay?
They got two of us to take Joel's place.
Okay. And I mean, that's effective as of a couple weeks ago. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
So you guys are on the job training right now.
Right.
That's exactly what we're training.
What's been the biggest challenge and the biggest blessing of that so far?
Well, I think I tend to try to resolve things, and here there are rules, and if you disobey certain rules, then there are certain consequences. And that's hard for me.
I think it's learning how to do it differently
Yeah.
in a different way. Yeah, than what we have done in the past.
Yeah.
Fitting into the way things are done here, learning a new way of doing things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So were you saying like it's hard to have that system, or you're used to having a system?
No, our system has always been, we didn't have a student handbook because a lot of times it was just people living with us.
Right.
At times we had as many as 30 people that lived in our house.
Wow.
So we had to have rules.
Right.
But if someone broke the rules, we couldn't always just send them home. We had to try to work through it and convince them convince them that, this is the way it has to be. You can't do it that way. And here there's so many students and there have to be rules.
And they're written down.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to have read them.
Yeah. Well, I read them twice the other day. I read chapter 5 of the student handbook. We read the staff handbook, and then I read chapter 2 and chapter 5. Hoyle told me that would be advisable to know what the kids were doing. So,
Right.
and I realized that you have to have rules and you have to abide by them. And, there are circumstances that can help to mediate, but it's just, we always had to work through it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's still the goal is, that
Restore.
restoration, but also even like, I think there's lots of opportunities to guide the students in their spiritual growth apart from the rules, just helping them navigate life. There's so many of our students getting married or just got married or looking for the right the right person to get married to, and there's a lot of different challenges they have to navigate in their 4 years while they're here.
Well, like with new tribes, if you get married after going through their training, you have to go back through the training.
As a married couple.
Yeah.
Right. All right, so where we left off, as best as I can remember, and I think I went back and listened a little bit to refresh my memory, was you guys had gotten to the jungle and were living there, and we got the first few stories of that, and then we kind of did a really brief overview of your time on the mission field. We kind of rushed through it real fast. So I want to go back to the first year of you guys on the mission field in Venezuela. Maybe we just start off with, what were the main lessons that you learned in the first year of ministry? I mean, we already covered things like it wasn't your guys' idea to go serve in the jungle. That was God organizing that. That wasn't what you guys, it wasn't like this heart's desire from when you were young, like, we want to go live in the jungle someday. No. So we covered that. And anyone who hasn't listened to that first podcast can go back and listen to that. But and so we kind of covered how God got you to where He wanted you, serving among the Pemon,
yes,
of Venezuela. So let's start off with, what did you learn in the first year, and then did you see any? My question would be, did you see any real fruit after 1 year of ministry, or how long did it take before you got to start seeing fruit of the gospel work you were doing? Because I think that's one benefit we have. I can interview graduates, but some of them have only been on the field 1 to 5 years. You guys have been there for the long haul. What's the difference between 1 year, 5 years, and how many years were you guys in South America?
50.
50.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had basically 16 years in the jungle. Mm-hmm. And then we had 16 years in a little bitty small town on a riverbank that was half Indian, half nationals.
In Venezuela? Or
Venezuela.
It's on the border of Venezuela and Colombia.
Yeah, and then we left there and we went to Bogota, Colombia, which is somewhere between 10 and 12 million people. And every ministry was totally different. So we basically had to learn how to do ministry all over again every time we left. But, we felt the Lord called us to the Indians, and I was very disappointed when we had to leave. Yeah. I don't know what you want to go into.
Let's start with the beginning. Let's start with the first year.
Well, the first year...
What gave you hope to continue on after in that first year, and what did you learn? Or was it just a matter of holding on until...
Well, we loved it. We loved it. We didn't, and we never thought we'd have to leave.
The thing is, we didn't expect to go to the jungle, and when God called us to the jungle, we were excited about it. We went there, but you never realize, in the States, you need a loaf of bread, you run to the store. Well, there was no store. So you had to take everything in that you were going to have for the next 2-3 months.
Wow.
We had a general list we went through, but like if you forgot your matches, you forgot your matches. You didn't have
matches.
Because it was going downriver in a canoe and then getting on a plane and going out.
Yeah. Wow. And so we had to learn how, to do all that. We had to build a house. We had the Indians build it for us, and we made an agreement that I bought them certain items that they wanted. Some of them wanted shoes, some wanted clothes, some wanted food stuff. And so we got the basic part of the house built. And then we had no furniture in it. We took a water bed down, and we had to make a frame for the water bed.
It was no electricity. It was hand-sawed.
Yeah, so it was a little handsaw where one guy gets on the bottom and the other guy's on top, pulling up and down. But we got us a bed, and I started building cabinets. We got those. I think probably the biggest blessing to me as we were living in the village was after my language learner had gone off into the jungle and had died because he got diarrhea.
Oh, wow.
Normally that's not fatal here. And a small child, but a grown man, is really rare. But he died in the jungle, so I had to find someone else. And I found a friend. He wasn't a good language helper. Actually, 2 men came into the village after we got there that spoke some Spanish. And that was great, because before there weren't any.
Right.
And I don't know if Jeannie was there ever a woman that really spoke in Spanish?
Later on, but at first there was no one spoke Spanish.
But you have to get into the language, so that forces you into the language. But I got a man that his name was Pete Marone, and I started walking with him and won him to the Lord. And then there was another guy that came in and won him to the Lord.
And he was one of the ones that spoke some Spanish.
He spoke some Spanish, yeah. And I didn't know how to share the gospel in Paimon. We were just learning a few words,
Yeah, and during the first year, that was probably the hardest thing, is not being able to speak to the people and being isolated and being far away from our kids and our family and not being able to even call on a telephone.
Okay, I have lots of questions. But always feel free to share what you think is important to share. Okay.
Okay.
So, how long did it take before you were conversational? Like you could say, "Hey, I want to, do this tomorrow," and that or whatever. And then how long before you could share the gospel in Paimon?
I would say it was probably really a couple of years before we got to where we could say basic sentences and feel like people understood us. I shared on my testimony, I don't know if it was here or not, that I couldn't get any of the men to help me learn the language.
Right.
So I got the kids. And the kids taught me how to speak, but they taught me how to speak the children's dialect, which I didn't know that it was what it was. And the adults never told me that I was speaking the children's dialect. For 15 years, they didn't tell me. And then just before we got kicked out, they came and said, Jaime, you always speak like the children. And I said, yeah, that's because you wouldn't teach me the language. But, you get to where you can share basic things. One of the things that they had told us in linguistic school was you need to be careful sharing the gospel when you're learning the language until you're sure that you have a grasp. How long have we been there when we came out with John 14:6?
I'd say probably at least a year and a half, 2 years.
John 14:6 talks of basic things. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So they understand all those concepts. No one comes to the Father but by me. And Jeannie made a poster, and later we made a track of people on the ground, and there was a cliff, but there was like a road that leaded up to heaven. And she wrote on that, I put the Bible underneath it so they would understand it was through God's Word that you got up to God. And so we started using that to share the gospel with them. But they didn't really understand. I didn't know how to tell them, you have to make a decision. You have to believe on Jesus. You need to know who He is, what He did, and you need to realize He died for you. I would say that really came about 4 years later, and there was an incident in the middle that made it all real for them. Because they had seen Catholic priests, like every 3 or 4 years, the priests would come down the river and they would baptize everybody. Their name, the word they had for baptism was get a new name.
Get a new name.
Yeah, because the priest would come in and baptize them, and they wouldn't tell him their Indian name, so he would give them a new Spanish name.
Yeah, they would use their
They thought that's what it was.
That you get baptized, and that meant you got a new name.
Right.
And so the word in Paimon that they had for baptism was
get a new name. But then we found another word that was get your face wet, meant that you were dunked under the water. So that's the one we chose.
Because they had to go into the river, wet to wash their face.
We went to Venezuela not knowing how to do anything, and we were working with a couple that had worked in Mexico for 4 years. And they had worked out in the rural areas, and they had stones thrown at them and been threatened and had all kinds of things. And they had been faithful, and they knew how to speak Spanish, and they were a great help to us. They helped us, get our Spanish straightened out, and really they had the experience the man, his name was Bob, and Bob taught me how to do everything. I had never built anything except a stool in wood shop in high school. That's all I'd ever built. I didn't know anything about, plumbing, electricity, anything. And he had worked with a contractor, so he knew a whole lot, and he taught me. And after that, we actually built 10 houses.
There.
Yeah, because a lot of
Venezuela.
they would only last so long, and then they would fall down.
Okay.
And then we had to build a house.
What did they build houses out of?
In the jungle, it was mud.
Mud, and then we built one out of rock from the river. We brought rocks up from the river,
Okay.
and also a slat board, like some places they use bamboo, but this was just
It was kind of
strips
like bamboo,
wood,
but it wasn't bamboo. But they would
just
split it.
lightweight wood.
Okay.
But after in the very beginning, Bob said we need to go to all the authorities and tell them where we're going to be living. The Indians have given us a letter, and we actually had a written document they had signed asking us to come live with them. So we went to the Indian Commission. We went to not the governor's office because he wouldn't receive us, but we went to all the other authorities that we could think of. Then we took a trip and we went to the Catholic missions.
Oh, wow.
And we went up to the door and we told them who we were and what we were doing and where we were living, and that we were trying to help the Indians and we were going to be translating the Bible.
And these places were a long ways from where we were
Yeah.
going to be
Okay.
living.
Okay.
They were
So we're talking about
weeks.
several days, several
So weeks. Some of
away
them
to get
were,
to these
I
places.
think the closest walking one was like 8 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were a long ways off. And the priests in both of the mission stations that we actually got to, they said, no problem. It's a free country. There's no restriction. We went back in the jungle. One day, soldiers showed up and they said, there's been a complaint about you living up here and you need to go and talk to our commanding officer. And I said, well, my partner is out of the country right now. He's coming back in next week, and I'll go out. We'll go to the city, and then we'll drive down. You could drive to where this commanding officer was. They said, no, he wants you to come right now.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, it's just a week. And they said, no. And I kind of got the idea that if I didn't say I would go the next day and take the airplane down, that they would just take me.
Wow.
So I said, okay, I'll go. And I told Jeannie, we were in the rainy season, and every morning from about 4 o'clock until 10 o'clock, it was raining. I mean, pouring down rain. So I told Jeannie, I said, I'm praying that if it rains tomorrow morning, I won't go. And I woke up the next day, there wasn't a cloud in the sky.
And
I told Jeannie, I said, I'm afraid something's going to happen. I don't want to go. But I told him I would, and I prayed about it, and
he had to go off and leave me in the jungle, and
With our daughter.
with our little girl who was still in diapers.
so I went down there, and I bought a ticket to go down to their commanding officer, and they put me on the plane. And when they did, there was a colonel got on with 4 Colombians that he had arrested, and he put them on, and I think he might have even had handcuffs on him. I don't know. I thought, wow. And so the plane, just before it got to the last stop where I was going to get off, stopped at a place where you could buy a soda pop or something to drink or eat if you wanted to. So
How big is this plane?
it had about 18 seats.
Okay.
That was downriver from us. He had to go down in canoe first.
Yeah, it took
Okay.
a 2-hour river ride.
Okay.
So I went and there was a pickup truck that would pick you up and take you to this little place where you could get something to eat. And I got in the pickup truck, and the guy who had got on with the prisoners walked up to me and started pulling his pistol out of his holster. He says, where do you think you're going? I said, well, I was going to go get something to drink. He said, no, you're not. You're under arrest.
Oh, wow.
I said, since when? He said, since you got on the plane.
Oh, wow.
And they got me there, and they took me down. They interrogated me, and it began to rain. Remember when I told you how we got stuck in the jungle the first time? It rained. Well, it rained again. And it rained so hard that it washed all the bridges out, all the roads out. It rained for 5 days, and the plane couldn't come back. And they had planned to send me out.
Well, this is a little town on the border of Brazil, too.
Yes, it was
Brazil.
a long ways
Real
away.
little, and it was way out in the
They plan to send you
boonies.
out where?
I didn't know.
Okay.
But there was an organization, and it was called in intelligence. It's kind of like FBI. It was
Okay.
intelligence, direction. And when they finally got me out, I asked him if I could take a note by to give to my partner so that he would know where I was. Actually, the note said, "Stay away. Something's going on. I don't know what it is. Don't come looking for me. You know, they're taking me to some office." And the guy that I gave the note to asked the soldiers where they were taking me, and they said, "To this private office." Well, this private office is so private, they don't have a building marked, that says like FBI.
Can I just make sure I know where we're at in this timeline? How long have you been?
This was later.
5 days I was in jail.
No.
How long?
Oh.
This is in 82.
About 4.5, 5 years.
Okay. So about 4.5, 5 years in, because we're getting up to where you're able to share the gospel more fully still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was asking about the first year.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. Keep on with that story. Keep going. So
Well-
you're getting brought to a private office.
It's like the FBI. What does it call them? The FBI. Venezuelan FBI.
Okay.
So they take me to this office, and by this time, it was late in the afternoon. And they took me in, and the soldiers signed me over to this other guy.
Okay.
And the guy came out, and he said, why are you here? And I said, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, they didn't tell me why they're sending me out here. They didn't tell me why I was under arrest.
I was still in the jungle with the little.
She didn't know where I was.
I didn't know where he was.
She thought I was living it up in a hotel somewhere.
And this is 5 days in already.
Yeah,
So you've been gone for 5 days.
I've been gone for 5 days.
My.
So when I got in there, the guy came and he sat down in front of me, and he said, well, I'm the boss of this office. He said, what do you have to say about these accusations? And I said, what accusations? He said, well, there's 4 pages of accusations here against you.
Oh wow.
And he started reading them off.
Okay.
You're making slaves of the Indians. You're selling beer and cigarettes and wine to the Indians. You're buying gold and diamonds from the Indians. And you're
CIA.
not allowing the Indian women to have babies.
Oh,
It was
wow.
all it got really ridiculous.
Okay.
And I'm just sitting there listening to it. They never said anything about accusations.
Did they say where the accusations were coming from, or
Well,
who had
this
made them?
the guy was sitting there reading these things off. He said, "What do you have to say to that?" I said, "That's a lie, and whoever wrote it is a liar."
Huh.
And that blew his mind. He like, whoa. He said, "These are very important people. These are like generals in the army. These are people who are trusted who wrote these things." And I said, "When you tell lies and you say things like that, you're a liar. I don't care what your position is."
Wow.
He said, what's your defense then? And they had brought me in every day for 5 days and interrogated me. And I gave the same story over and over and over again. Supposedly they typed it down. They would bring me in the next day and make me go all over again. And I said, well, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm not going to tell you anyway. And he looked at me, he said, he's like, buddy, I'm your last hope. He said, you really need to tell me because they want me to send you to Caracas and put you in jail. And I said, well, will you let me tell you the whole story? He said, sure, go ahead. He said, we got no place to go. He says, I don't even have a house. I just got here today. I just took over this office today.
Oh.
So I told him the whole story. I told him, my father died. I was raised by my aunt and uncle, how God called us, how God had prepared the Indians' hearts. And when I got through, the guy was just staring at me. And he looked over at his guy that was in the office with him. He says, have you ever heard anything like that? And the other guy couldn't even talk. He just shook his head. He said, wow. He said, why didn't you tell them that? I said, because they wouldn't listen to me. They just asked questions and wanted me to answer their questions. He said, look, he said, I think that's a much better defense than the papers that they sent out with you. If you're willing to tell me that story over again, I'll type it up and you can sign it and we'll send this up for you. So we went in the other room and we started doing that. And the guy was really helpful. He said, there was another guy that left here this morning. And I came and took his place. That's why I'm still here in the office. I don't have a place to go to sleep tonight. So I'm just going to sleep here. He said, I called Caracas and they said to take you to the jail and put you in with the drunks and the homosexuals.
Wow.
He said, somebody wants to do you harm. And so I told him the whole story. He typed it. And even occasionally, you know, I'd only been speaking Spanish for a short period of time. He said, don't you think this word would be better than that word? You know, he'd help me correct my grammar and he straightened it all out. We got through. He signed it. And
He also left you the paper. He went out of the room. And
well, that was later.
oh, okay.
Yeah. So then my partner, who I'd told, don't look for me, started walking down the street hollering out, Jim, where are you? And the guy said, I bet that's your buddy you were telling me about. He said, I want to talk to him. So he went out and got him. It's like 11 o'clock at night now. He got him. He brought him in. He put me in the other room so that I couldn't pass any signals or help him tell the story. And he asked him, he said, can you tell me your story? And he said, yeah, but my story is different than Jim's. So he said, because I lived in Michigan. I didn't even meet him until a certain time ago. And he sat down and told him his story. When he got to the part about the Indians, about Ramon having the dreams and the Indians inviting us to come and all the other stuff, the guy was just blown away. He came out and he said, wow. He said, you know, I can tell, you know, there's two different people with two different stories, but they all come together and they're exactly the same. He said, I believe you guys are telling the truth. He said, I need to investigate this, but he said, my phone's been ringing off the wall. He said, my boss in Caracas keeps telling me, take you to the jail and put you in with the drunks. He said, that makes me think there's something funny going on. And I said, well, who told all these lies? And Bob and I were sitting on the side of the desk. He said, well, I can't tell you that. He says, but I have all these accusations. He says, I have to investigate. He said, I need to get a drink of water. And he laid the papers down in front of us so that we could see all the signatures on the bottom.
Oh, wow.
8 Catholic priests had signed this document. You know, and to him in a Catholic country, you know, these guys are authorities.
Right, yeah.
He came back in and Bob said, look, he said, Jim probably didn't tell you, his wife is stranded in the jungle and she doesn't even know where he's at. We don't know how much food she has left or anything. He said, I've called an airplane to come over and fly in tomorrow and pick them up. And that was going to be a Sunday. And they don't fly on Sunday, but it was emergency to get them out. He said, if you want to know the truth, you can go into the jungle. We'll send you in. And you can talk to the Indians.
Yeah.
And the guy said, yeah, I want to do that.
Okay.
Well, when the plane landed, of course, everybody was surprised because there's this guy sitting in the front seat that's got a pistol stuck in his belt. And all the Indians just backed up and said, Jim, what did you do? And he turned around and he said, Jim, don't say anything. Don't say anything. I want to talk to them and I don't want them to know what's going on. So he got out. And God had arranged that day that every village up and down the river had come to our village to have a meeting. I don't know even about what. So all the leaders up and down the village or the river were there. And he took them into a big building and he shut the door. And he got a couple of guys that spoke Spanish and he told them, you know, I need to know the truth, what's going on here. He came out of the meeting. He says, wow. He said, everything you told me is the truth. He said, as far as I'm concerned, you can stay here.
Wow.
But I'd already heard him say, they said put him in jail.
Right.
So I was worried that they would just somebody else would come back in and get me and then we'd be gone.
Okay.
And so we had already given away all the food, closed up the house. You know, when you're in the jungle, you have to close everything up
Put
tight.
everything in barrels. We put them into barrels.
So we came out, and that afternoon he said, come back in tomorrow afternoon. He says, this will all be cleared up. He says, I'm going to write up my report tonight. Tomorrow I'll send it up, and by 3 or 4 o'clock it'll all be over. So we went in about 4 o'clock and sat down. He said, there's some strong, powerful people that want to get rid of you. He said, I just found out, just figured this out. The guy that I took his place was in on this. They wanted you to come out the first day when it started raining, and they already had a plot to kick you out of the country, persona non grata. But because of the rain and the delay, they promoted him because he agreed to do this. And he had to leave, and I came in, and now I've done this. He said, I need to talk to you. And he decided through our conversation, because I told him, I said, we don't do any of those things. And on top of that, I said, I know the Indians are always complaining that the Catholic priests put them to work, 10, 12 hours, and then they give them a can of sardines and a handful of rice. That's their pay for the day. And if they find any gold or diamonds, they make them sell them to them at a discount. And I was there when we went to the Catholic villages, and I saw them selling wine and beer and cigarettes to the Indians. I said, but we don't do any of that. He said, that's interesting. He called one of his guys in from the outside. He says, I want so-and-so and so-and-so to go to the Catholic villages, and I want you to just go in there as tourists, and I want you to observe and find out if these things are true. Now I want you back here within a week. So they did, and they came back. Every day his boss is calling. He said, what's going on? I told you, I want them in jail. I want them up here. We've got to do this. He says, but I'm investigating. He says, I'm right in the middle of it. He says, I've been to the village. I've talked to the Indians. They're innocent. He says, I tell you, this is what we're going to do. That week, the officials he had sent out came back. He wrote up a report about the Catholic missions. He took that, and he took the report that he had done on us, and he went to Caracas. He said when he got to the office, he was just walking down the hall, and his boss came down just screaming and yelling at him and insubordinate. He said, I told you to do this. He said, look, but this is my report. He said, these guys are innocent. He said, he reached down and he grabbed it and he jerked it away from him. He says, I don't care what your report says. You disobeyed orders. He said, but listen, I found out that the Catholic missions are doing these things. And he said, I sent 2 guys up there, and I wrote up another report. He said, when he pulled that out, the guy looked at him and says, give me that report. Well, if you investigated, that's okay. We'll just dismiss the charges. And we were allowed to stay.
Wow.
And that was just the beginning.
Okay.
Well, we were in
with the Catholic Church. Or what?
Yeah, because...
And then through them, the government.
Yeah, because, see, they had an agreement with the government until they became a democracy. Once they became a democracy, then they had to give freedom of religion. But they had the Catholic Church was actually the official religion, but they couldn't give them priority.
And before, because the area was, just, what would you call them? Just,
Indian territory.
yeah, well, it was, but there was nothing there.
Just
there
the
was
mission.
no towns or anything, and there were a few missions. They put the Catholics over that area, like in charge of it
like in charge of it.
before,
okay.
to kind of control it.
And
So, but
after that happened, I don't know how much longer you want me to go here, but to cut this up. After that, a couple of years went by, and we didn't have any more visits or anything. But there was always this underground movement. You know, there were things started coming out in the newspapers, articles written against us, all lies. And so we would go out to the city, and we actually had people that would, going down the street, they would spit on us. And I don't think they ever threw rocks, but
they
they...
accused us of being CIA and
Generals of the American
generals
Army.
of the American Army.
And
we
CIA.
had an airplane that was hidden, and we flew out at night.
Wow.
But
Okay,
the Pope went to Venezuela. And when he did, the big man in that area that we had tried to talk to went to Caracas, talked to the Pope. This was, I think, John Paul the 23rd or something like that.
Okay.
And they asked him to talk to the president because there was no legal grounds to kick us out. Talk to the president to kick us out. And he promised that he would do that. And within 6 months, he formed a committee of his cabinet and had his cabinet go to the city where we had our base camp when we came out of the jungle where we would live to investigate the missionaries. But they weren't going to go in the jungle. And we just happened to hear that this committee was there. And we went over and confronted them. And we sat down and he said, look, you say you come to investigate us. Well, why don't you go to the Indians that we live with and ask them? And they said, well, we don't have any money for airplane rides or anything. So we've already taken care of that. We've called an airplane over and we're going to pay all the expenses and we're going to fly you guys into the jungle so that you can sit down with the Indians and talk to them. And so part of the committee didn't want to fly. They didn't like flying those little Cessna planes. And the other part said they would go. One guy was the Minister of Education. And he was vehemently against us. I mean, you could tell by every word that he said. But he did go into the jungle. We had started a school. Of course, he thought he had started this school. He didn't know that the missionaries were paying for everything and that we had created this material in Paimon. And the kids were learning to read and write Paimon. And then we started giving them primers in Spanish with the same pronunciation. The kids could sit down with a Spanish book and they could read it and pronounce it real good. But they didn't know what it meant. And so this guy, he was in there supposedly investigating and he saw the school. He said, I'm going to go to the school. And he went over there and I kind of followed after him. And he called the school teacher over who was one of the two men who spoke Spanish. It was a young man who went to the city because he was ill. He actually lost a lung, but they saved his life.
Wow.
And he was teaching the kids, and the guy walked up to him and he said, I want you to sing me a song in Paimon. He said, oh yeah. So they sang him a song and he said, bravo, that was great. What does the song say? He says, that's Jesus. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And the Minister of Education, I want you to sing me a Paimon song. He said, well, that's a Paimon song. He said, well, sing me another one. So they sang him another one. He says, what does that say? He said, that's Jesus, and he's standing at the door of your heart knocking and says, if you'll open the door, he'll come in and he'll have communion with you. And the guy said, don't you have any Paimon songs? He said, those are Paimon. We have a lot of them. He said, are they all religious? And the guy thought, well, they're all Bible verses. He said, well, I want you to sing me a song that your mother sang to you when she sat you on your knee and you were a baby. He said, my mother never sang to me.
Wow.
He said, every culture has songs. Who sings songs? Who knows the songs? And he thought about the old witch doctor. They sang songs. That was their to commune with the spirits. He said, well, there is an old man here that sings songs. He knows songs. He said, well, call him. So they called him up. He went over to a meeting house, and he was under there. We went over there with him. He said, tell him to sing me a song. And they told him, they said, look, Jim and Bob are going to get kicked out of the jungle, maybe out of the country, if you don't sing this guy a song. He looked at him, he said, I'm walking down Jesus' path. I can't go back. I can't sing those songs.
Wow.
And I'm praising God in my heart. I can't say anything. And the guy turned around and he says, what, did Jim say you can't sing? Did Jim tell you not to do anything? He said, no. And he's doing this through a translator. And the translator was the other guy that spoke Spanish. And he said, you tell Jim that he can't tell you anything. He can't say anything. He said, I'm in charge of this. And so the translator, who was my friend, said, look, if you don't see him, they're going to take Jim out of here and put him in jail again. And the old man, and I'm praying. I can't even look at him. Because tears are coming to my eyes because of what he said. I'm walking down Jesus' path. And I'm saying, Lord, don't let him go back. Don't let him turn around. And the old man looked at us and he thought, well, I could sing something for him. So he started trying to clear his throat. And in Paimon, he told the translator, you tell this fat man if he wants me to sing him a song, he can come back and learn my language like Bob and Jim. Then I'll sing him a song.
Wow.
And the minister of education said, what did he say? What did he say? What did he say? And he tried to figure out how to translate this. He said, well, his throat hurts and he can't sing right now, but if you come back again, he'll sing you a song.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So they took us out, and after hearing what was going on and the other half of the committee talking to the people, they had already written up a document to kick us out. But because half of the people decided they weren't going to sign that document because it wasn't true. And the other one, they were just doing what the president said to do. So they asked us if we would move to another village, that they would give us a written permit to go to another village and to work.
Okay.
So we said, well, for the sake of the work and the translation, we'll do that. They said, well, you get all your stuff out, and then you come up to Caracas, you talk to me, and we'll do it. And we went up there, and he said, well, it takes time to make this up. And I kept calling back every other day. And then I got to where I just called every day, and all I could ever talk to was the guy's secretary. And the secretary finally said, sir, don't be stupid. He's never going to give you a permit. Now that you moved out, you can't move back, and they're not going to give you a permit. So then the other families who were working with us, they talked it over, and they decided, we've been arrested, we've been thrown in jail, we've had all these problems, and now they're saying we can't go to the Indians, so we're leaving. And the guys weren't cowards. One of them went to the Philippines. And he lived in the island where they were killing people, Christians, all the time. One of the other guys went to Bolivia. Another one wound up going to Costa Rica, I think it was. But Jeannie and I just looked at each other and said, well, God called us here, and he hadn't called us anywhere else yet. So we got one of the Indian men who spoke Spanish to agree to come out, and we would pay all of his expenses for him and his wife. And we called the missionary school where our kids were going and offered to work with them if we could take, the translator over there and try to work on translation of the New Testament. And they agreed to it. So we worked for 1 year, school year, with that school. The translator stayed for up until Christmas break. And then he said he wanted to go back in the jungle. But then he never came back out because it was cold over there. It was up in the mountains.
No Indian food.
And every day they wouldn't eat the food. Every day I had to buy them hot dogs. That's all they could eat was hot dogs. They didn't like anything else. So they didn't come back.
Those from the juggle.
Yeah.
They didn't like the food.
Well, we were dorm parents
vegetables and
at
salad.
at a mission school for American kids. And it was a whole different culture. And
They didn't like the American.
They didn't like American food.
And in this, we had only been about 8 years at the end of that school year. And then Bob, my partner, called me up. He said, Jim, we've been talking it over, and we've decided we made a mistake. God called us to the Paimon, and we think we ought to go back. If you're willing to go back with us, we're coming back. I said, we're willing. He said, this time, we're going to get a lawyer, and we're going to know our rights, and we're not leaving unless the lawyer says we have to leave. So we did that, And they finally came in and gave us a written order that said we could not live in that village. We took it to the lawyer. The lawyer went all the way to the Venezuelan Supreme Court. And while they were trying to decide this case, we got them to give us a permit to live in the village, because that's where our house was officially. But they put a stipulation that we could not teach or preach in the church. If the Indians came to our house, we could sit down and talk to them about anything they want to talk about, but we could not. And you know, I think God was just preparing the Indians. And in that time, we had had a number of believers. We were now having a yearly conference at Christmas time, at a Bible conference, 2 weeks to a month. And then at Easter, they would come back again and they would have these Bible conference. And in between, we were just teaching the Indians, and they were teaching, and their teaching was got to be really good.
When we were working on translation, they would come to our house and would work on the translation and also teach the Indians, and then they would go and teach in the church.
You mentioned the witch doctor saying, "I'm on the Jesus path now."
Yeah.
I'm not, and all the the people singing the verses.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to hear some of those stories about people like when you were able to share the gospel and you saw that they understood. When I want to hear some of those moments.
The first thing that we did is, when people started coming to the Lord, the first person who actually came and understood and made a profession of faith was
Gracia.
Well, Ingracia was the girl that worked with us, but Ramon, the young man who had the dreams, you know, I think he'd probably been a believer all the time, but he came and he says, you know, they called it grab Jesus in my heart. So sat down with him, explained the gospel, made sure he understood it, and told him, you know, what you need to do is just pray and ask Jesus to come into your heart.
Yeah, there's not really a good way to say believe in Pemon.
Yeah.
There's not a word for forgiveness in Pemon either.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So how did you explain
Well, we just said
forgiveness?
Well,
You had
that was the best
a
phrase that we
phrase.
came up with. Grab a hold of Jesus.
It's believing,
Take
but
him into your
forgiveness
heart.
is what was the phrase we used for forgiveness? Not remembering.
To receive,
To forget.
to forget,
And
and that free gift. We had to make another word because in that culture, any gift you got, then you owed
it's
somebody
reciprocal.
reciprocate.
Oh, wow.
So it had to be a free gift that expects nothing in return.
So you do it with a phrase when you translate it.
Okay.
So Ramon made a profession of faith, and Bob said, I want to explain to him how to win people to the Lord. So we went back inside the church. We just had a church service, and he explained to him, and he says, this is what you need to do to everybody. And there was several other people that right then said they wanted to believe. And so we had them come in and had him lead them to the Lord. And this guy Ramon, you know, they had heard about the dreams. The Pemon Nation knew about him. And there were a lot of villages that had invited him to come. And they would even send money to pay airfare to get him to the closest place so that he could get to their village.
Wow.
So
it was just...
You led Victor to the Lord, too.
Well, yeah. The Victor, my translator, came to the Lord.
The first girl I led was Ingracia, the girl that worked with us, and I couldn't speak Pemon very well. But she said something to me like, well, yeah, I'll think about it or something. I said, well, a snake could come in here and bite you.
And you would die.
And you would die, and then you wouldn't have another chance. And so she prayed and received the Lord. And then on the Parade magazine cover, I have her baby in my arms.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen that picture.
Yeah. But, you know, we just began to give that responsibility to them. Well,
Yeah.
as they began to believe and as they began to lead others, they came up with a formula. We would go into church, they would have a sermon, and then like the old Baptist churches used to go out the front door and the pastor waited to shake everybody's hand. Well, the first guy would shake Ramon's hand, then our hand, then he would get in line. So basically, everybody came out, shook everybody's hand.
And got in line and shook everybody's hand.
So like you didn't go out the door without shaking
Everybody's
hand. Wow.
Sometimes the little kids would sneak away.
Right.
But then the ones who wanted to be saved would come back and they would say, I want to grab Jesus. And then Ramon would go back in and he would sit down with them and explain, make sure they understood. Well, when we had about almost 100 believers, we decided we got to start baptizing people.
Was everyone coming to church, whether they were professing Jesus or not?
3 times a day, every day of the week.
All the verses a lot of the verses, when they were translated, he would make them songs.
Mm-hmm.
So they were memorizing verses.
So they were memorizing verses. But then this is specifically as they began to profess Christ.
Right.
Say, I want to grab Jesus.
Right.
Okay. So we're up to 100 now. We need to start baptizing people. Okay.
Yeah, and it was after that we baptized, I think, 80-something people one day.
Wow.
And we went out the next day, and when the plane landed, the army came out and surrounded the plane and said, you can't go back in.
Well, it's newspaper articles.
Yeah, this was before
They were already attacking this.
they were attacking us in the newspapers.
Okay,
Newspaper
this was before
articles.
This was after we had the first 100 believers in the village.
when? Right.
All right, they know how to win people, and they know how to baptize people.
Well, how many years in? Like, where in the timeline are we?
We're
And this was
probably
around the first article came out when?
this was
Like
probably before
79 or something?
before the Pope had come to the country. Actually,
It was before 82.
the guys had gone out.
Probably 79, 80.
No,
somewhere
this
in
is
there.
later than that. It was like 81, 82.
The first baptisms?
Yeah.
So,
I
about
think
how many years in are we at this point?
We've been up there 5 years
Okay.
before we really had baptisms. We wanted to make sure they understood, and
So, a plane lands, and then what happened?
well, they took us. We had to go out. So when we got to the city, landed at the airstrip in the city, they were waiting on us.
The army.
The army. They surrounded our plane with guns, and they said, "You're under arrest."
Okay.
This is not the first time,
Okay.
but they took us in.
This was
and-
another time.
Yeah, and
Okay.
they interrogated us. They kept one at a time. They took us into a private room, and it was good cop, bad cop. One guy would go in, they would be really nice and talk about, oh, what all did you do? How did you do that? How did you stand living up there? And the next guy would go in and say, you're in there trying to change their culture. You're perverting the Indians, and they would just yell and scream, you ought to be in jail. And then as their stories didn't change, then they kept sending everybody home. Well, I was the last one in, and I had the bad cop.
How many missionaries were with you?
Well, at first it was just 4 of us.
Okay.
And then there were
Well, at that
2
time,
other couples that joined us.
yeah, but when they surrounded the plane, there were only the 2 families, the 2 couples. Our son had come back. It was when Rob went to
Yeah,
school.
but when we did when we did the baptisms, that was earlier. That wasn't the same time period, I don't think.
No, I think it was the same time because they wouldn't let us go back in. And that's when I started telling God, you made a mistake. Because we got all these brand new Christians up there, and they're going to come down, and the Catholics going to attack them, and they're going to force them into going back to the old ways.
So you were the last person, and you were with the bad cop.
Yeah, and they kept me there till like 2 o'clock in the morning. And finally, they didn't give us a ride home or anything. We lived way out in the boonies. But I found a taxi cab that was working that time of night, and he took me home. And we had to go back in the next day, but they wouldn't let us go back in the village. And I kept telling God, all these people, they need us up there. And when we finally did and get a permit to go back up, we went in, and there weren't 100 believers. There were almost 150 believers.
Wow.
And God showed me, Jim Berryhill, you see, I don't need you. I'm allowing you to work in my ministry. It's not your ministry.
Wow.
And I realized right then, it was God's work. He just allowed us to be part of it.
Wow.
That changed my entire attitude.
Yeah. This podcast is a part of Rio Grande Bible Ministries. If you want to learn more about the Bible College, that's in Spanish, the language school to learn Spanish, the radio station, or Bibleville, or any of the other ministries of Rio Grande, find us at riogrande.edu. That's our website, riogrande.edu. And if you want to interact with the podcast, if you want to ask questions, give us feedback, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, searching for Entre Hermanos. Make sure to add Rio Grande to your search, and we will be the first ones to show up. Thank you for listening to our podcast, Entre Hermanos, which means Between Brothers.